right, hello everybody. It's Thursday, the 23rd of April. This is David Fisher from Immigration Chambers, a specialist immigration firm here in Auckland, New Zealand. And this is another part of our video series doing some interviews with specialists in the industry. Today we have a very special guest. This is my friend from Australia, whose name is Ed Rimmington. Hi Ed, how's it going?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. We've been 4 weeks in lockdown over here in New Zealand, so we're all starting to go slightly stir crazy at home, but otherwise we're doing fine.
Yeah, similar this way as well. I think this is week 4 of lockdown. Not as strict as you guys, but yeah, I think everyone's going a bit crazy as well.
Right, okay. Yeah, so just for our audience's benefit, Ed is a registered migration agent in Australia. And what that means is that it's essentially the equivalent of what we call a licensed immigration advisor here in New Zealand. He's authorized by the Australian government, which means he's done all kinds of study of immigration law and practice in Australia. And he's operating in Melbourne, which is in the state of Victoria in Australia. Perhaps, is there anything you want to say about how that works over in Australia?
You pretty much covered it. Yeah, in Australia, that to practice in migration law or to process visas, that you have to be a MARA agent. So MARA is the Migration Agents Regulatory Authority in Australia. To become a migration agent, I had to study a course in migration law and then do a test. And then after passing that test, I was able to get my license as a MARA agent. So yeah, that's pretty much about the process of being a MARA agent. And then, just been helping people get their visa and process their applications for the last 3 to 4 years.
3 to 4 years, okay, nice. So it must be quite a strange time over there. Obviously, we're all on lockdown, but what I think a lot of our viewers or a lot of the people who follow us, they've been asking us questions about how to deal with the lockdown here in New Zealand. And today I was just trying to see if we can get a picture about what's really the difference between these two countries. What's happening over in Australia. I mean, here in New Zealand, we're not supposed to go out at all. In fact, I saw a video on YouTube earlier today where some people were being pulled over by the police and threatened with being arrested simply because they were out in their car claiming to go to the supermarket. Now, supermarkets are open. We're allowed to go there one by one, wait in line, put on your mask, limits of goods and things like that. But what's happening in Australia? Are any shops still open?
Yeah, the shops are still open, so we're not as strict as you guys. I hear that New Zealand has an eradication strategy, so they want to get rid of COVID-19. We have a sort of we want to stabilize the curve. We want to bend the curve. So our restrictions are not so strict, but we are still in lockdown. I think in equivalent, it's like level 3 to you guys. I think you guys are level 4. But you're changing down to level 3 soon, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So from next Tuesday midnight, we shift to level 3, and we've just been told today there are certain things we're allowed to do now: to go to the office, to go to work, to prepare things, deliveries, and get the office ready for opening, or get the businesses ready for opening. But yeah, that's right. Oh, it doesn't sound so bad over there then.
Yeah, so everyone's been in lockdown probably since for 3.5, 4 weeks now, but we can go outside for 4 different reasons. Those 4 reasons are if you're going to shops to buy groceries. The other one is that if you want to buy medicine. The third reason is if you want to do exercise. And the 4th reason is if you're an essential service worker. In Australia, the essential service worker is a bit more sort of broad or wider than in New Zealand. So essential service worker is usually someone who's working in a hospital, working in the supermarket, those sort of things. But also something that we discussed before this chat is like childcare. If a lot of the government has put money into the childcare centres, like they've backed the childcare centres to stay open because a lot of essential service workers, they have kids and they
Right.
can't look after their kids, so they
Interesting.
want the child. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because here now we have a debate about schools partially opening next week under level 3. And they've allowed, they're saying that you can send your child to school only if you have to, because you're a worker who's going back to work, and only up to a certain age level. And some of the teachers are complaining. They're saying, hold on a second, this is not really fair. You're an essential worker, which means you're out there in the public risking catching this virus, and then you're going to come home and spread it to your child, and then your child's going to come to the school and spread it to the teachers, which will just spread it even more to everybody else. But anyway, look, neither you or I are doctors. We don't know, the ins and outs of how this thing really spreads. All we can do is talk about visa matters and immigration matters. So why don't we get into that? We've got a few sort of recurring questions that come up regularly about Australia, and specifically the difference between New Zealand and Australian policies. And so I just wanted to go through a few of those things. First of all, my big question is, what's really the difference between being a resident and being a citizen in Australia? Because as I mentioned to you, here in New Zealand, practically speaking, there's no difference. Once you become a resident in New Zealand, you can vote, right? You have access to all the health system, the university system. After a period of time of getting your residence, just a couple of years, you can also get the student loan from the government to study at university. And, being a citizen just means you have your passport, essentially, practically speaking. But I understand that's a little bit different in Australia.
Yeah, it is a little bit different. It's a bit more distinguished in that you got a bit more rights as a citizen. So as a permanent resident, that you are a permanent resident, then you can live and work in Australia forever, but you still have to meet the obligations of being a permanent resident. So for example, some people will just get their permanent residency and then they won't come to Australia, or they might stay for a couple of years and then they will leave Australia. However, that as part of being a permanent resident, that you have to spend at least a certain amount of time in living in Australia. And if you're not living in Australia, you have to show that you still have a connection with Australia to keep that permanent residency. And something else about the permanent residency, that yes, they have the same rights. They can get the healthcare, and they have access to education, higher education. However, that in the past, it would permanent residents would have access to HEX directly. However, that I think they've just changed.
HEX is the student loan scheme, right?
That's right. Yeah, sorry. Yes, for those people who don't know what HEX is, that's our government student loan scheme, where if you're an Australian citizen, and some permanent residents as well, that you can access higher education and defer your tuition onto the government as a loan and pay it back once you start earning a certain amount. Right. So in the past, that people who are permanent residents would have access to that HEX, and actually it's a bit more than that. The government subsidises some of the courses, right. So cheaper tuition. Yeah. But in Australia, as a permanent resident, they've changed the rules that you have access to a loan, but it's not going to be subsidised unless you are the Australian citizen.
Right, so there's really an incentive to go all the way to citizenship, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I guess that's a lot more of a heavy-handed approach, strict border control approach that filters all the way through Australian law, which we don't see as strongly here in New Zealand. I've often heard it anecdotally said that Australia more easily will let people come in than New Zealand for things like visitor, student, the entry-level type visas. But they are so much more strict about getting rid of people or banning them from staying. Whereas in New Zealand here, somehow we're a bit of a soft touch once you're here. Once you're here, we have a bit of an approach of, okay, you're in our neighborhood now, so we find a way to look after you. And the tribunals and the courts often, will lean towards, humanitarian arguments rather than just a strict border control of, sorry, no boat people, you're out of here, which I think
Yeah,
happens more in Australia.
I think it's a bit political. Like, I mean, yes, like Australia is generally more conservative with their sort of policies when it comes to immigration. Yes, like those sort of temporary visas are sort of more easier to get and enter Australia, but sort of going on to permanent residency
Yeah.
is a bit
A lot
more
harder. The
harder.
pathways are a bit stricter, yeah. Okay, so speaking of those pathways, what most people that that we deal with really want to know is, how can I become a resident? Now, obviously, there are many pathways. The key ones being, to come into Australia as a student, or to come in as a worker, or to come in as a family member. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about student visas. Like what are the really strong pathways to come in as a student in Australia?
So, so you're talking about the student with the sort of goal of trying to get permanent residency, or you?
Goal of gaining residence, yeah.
Yeah. So, like in Australia, that a lot of people sort of use the student visa as a way to build skills that that can be for occupations that are on our skilled migration list. So maybe similar to New Zealand, I'm not 100% sure, but in Australia that we have a skilled occupation list. This is a list of occupations in Australia that we have a shortage of skills, and that we need to supplement those with skilled migrants. So a lot of people who want to migrate to Australia or to get permanent residency, they study courses that are related to those occupations on the skills
Right.
list.
So this would be skills, obviously at the high level: doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, and then coming further down into managerial positions, chefs, cooks, and mechanical workers. And this would be similar to what we use under the ANSCO system, the Australia and New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations. Am I correct?
Yeah, that you're correct, and that's what I was going to mention before. That actually something that we are unique on, that we both use that same ANSCO system for, like the occupation. So the occupations, I guess that on your list will be the same as ours according to the ANSCO code.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
what they're looking for in the regards to skill level and the sort of like the description of the roles and the skills are exactly the same according to
That's right.
ANSCO.
I understand, though, that there is one key difference with the way, and that is in the way that we treat the assessment of skill under that list, especially when it comes to a residence application. Here in New Zealand, when you start your residence process, you make the claim that your occupation, your job, your employment matches the skill level requirements under ANSCO for that job. And then you go about applying. You submit your expression of interest, you submit all your documents, you get invited to apply, you submit your documents, you wait, these days, 12 months or more for a case officer to pick up the file. And then once the visa officer has the file in their hot hands, they'll start looking into it and then start making an assessment of the job that you're doing, and they will decide whether or not it matches the skill level. So that visa officer has, under current rules, the 100% of the assessment control. But I believe in Australia it's slightly different.
Oh yes, well that's something interesting, because in Australia actually we have skills assessment bodies. So rather than leaving it to a case officer to decide whether you have the appropriate skills, that before you apply for a skilled migration visa, that the requirement is that people need to get their skills assessed. So they need to contact their skills assessment body and make an application saying that, oh, I've got the equivalent skills for, like, for example, a chef. And then they make the application, provide the documentation of their skills, and then that skills assessing body will check it and deem whether you have the required skills for that occupation. Then after you have that skills assessed and approved, then people will go and make an application.
About applying, yeah. See, this in my opinion is really a much more advanced way to do it. And I've often joked You know, that the way we do it here is it's putting the cart before the horse, because you're forcing people to put all of their energy and effort, time and money into the application, and then they sit back and wait. And then it's only 12 months, 15 months later, when a case officer is looking at it, that they have some idea about whether they're in the ballpark, and they're placing their future in the hands of. And here's where it gets interesting, because you know, if you are claiming to be skilled, you are ENSCO skill level 1, 2, or 3, which are the high 3.
Yeah.
But you're placing the responsibility to assess where your job is with a person, an immigration officer, whose job actually falls under a lower skill level at number 4. So under ENSCO, immigration officer comes as a skill level 4 occupation. So somebody in a lower skilled job has the job to decide who is higher skilled. It's really quite, it boggles the mind.
Yeah, no, this system, I think it has its pros and cons. I think the biggest benefit is that if you're going and putting it with the skills assessing bodies for your particular industry, then you have experts who are assessing the skills. They know what type of roles and tasks that are related to being skilled in that area. ANSCO is just a guide, actually. Like, I mean, I think the ANSCO code was made like 30 years ago. So, right. I mean, there's
a lot of purposes.
Yeah, that's right. So leaving it up to a case officer to decide whether you have these specific skills where they don't even have any industry knowledge or knowledge about this specific occupation. Yeah, it's a bit, Russian roulette in that sort of way.
Yeah. But well, look, you see, we don't really have any way around it here in New Zealand, because the policy specifically states that an assessment of skill is primarily based in that occupation description in ENSCO. So ENSCO is written there into the policy. Immigration officers don't have a choice but to follow that. I guess the only upside would be that, you know, there are some cases where we have occupations or employment that doesn't necessarily easily fit into a skill, you know, of one occupation, but we're able to convince a case officer independently that they should be approved for residency anyway. And so sometimes that can be a bonus for people who might not otherwise be assessed properly under a private assessment.
Yeah, no, we have a similar thing with our temporary work visas in Australia. So while that the skills assessment is more towards like if you're going to get permanent residency, with our temporary work visas that there's a bit more discretion and a bit more sort of leniency about the type of work experience and whether you are skilled for that occupation. Because sometimes, as I said, that the ENSCO code is 30 years old, it's a guide. There are new occupations that are out there that haven't got an ENSCO code. So you need to sort of, that's where the temporary skilled work visas, that you can, you know, claim that this is related work experience, or this is related to this occupation.
Then it can have a more nuanced assessment.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, that's good, because it brings me into another subject I wanted to talk about, and that is work visas. You know, here in New Zealand, we've often been called a one-trick pony because, you know, really there's one main type of work visa and there's one main type of residence application for most people. Whereas in Australia, you know, you have the various states, you've got federal, you've got state level, you have employer level sponsorship arrangements. You know, here in New Zealand, generally speaking, you have an applicant comes to New Zealand, finds a job in the public arena. The employer wants to hire them, but they don't know what to do. And so they have to apply for what we call an essential skills visa. And even though that may change later this year, what it's called, generally speaking, they have to go through the labour market test. It gets advertised and you prove that there are no New Zealanders, or you demonstrate that there are no available New Zealanders who are suitable for the job. But I understand there's a much wider variety of types of work visas in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We for working in Australia, that there's sort of a bit of a variety of types of temporary work visas. Our main temporary work visa is called the TSS visa, so that's a temporary short-term skill visa,
Yeah.
and basically that visa, if you are someone with some working for an employer and you have particular skills and your employer wants to keep to sponsor you, then they can apply for a visa under that stream. However, there are a bit of well, not restrictions, but there's rules that you must apply to actually apply for that visa. For example, now you have to have 2 years related or relevant work experience in that occupation that they're nominating you for. So that's where the sort of for a temporary work visa, there's a bit more discretion because someone may be trying to be sponsored as a chef, but they might have worked as a cook for 3 years. So you can sort of, and they might work as a chef at that in that place in that employer for their employer for a year. So you can sort of use that sort of related experience to meet the benchmarks.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and also we do labour market testing as well. So that's a requirement. We need for employers to see if there are any Australian citizens or permanent residents that could meet that occupation. Usually the ad goes up for 28 days.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be consecutively. It can be like you could have put up for 2 weeks here or 2 weeks, 2 months previously. It does, as long as it's within a 6-month period that you can have the labour market testing there. And also, depending on the different free trade agreements, some countries don't need to do labour market testing at all.
Really? So you mean people who are holding certain passports can just bypass that altogether?
That's correct.
Interesting.
So,
Like for example.
I'll give you a big example. So I'm not sure about your clients, but a lot of my clients are Korean. So because of the free trade, the Korean-Australian Free Trade Agreement, one of the things in there is like the movement of labour. So Australia can't have any like discriminatory policies towards like Koreans wanting to sort of get work in Australia. So they're exempt from labour market testing.
Wow. Well,
However, it's a bit of a red herring because uh, even though you're exempt for labour market testing, you still have to show that you haven't, the employer hasn't sort of just made the job just for this person, that there is like there's a genuine position, there's a genuine need for that person.
okay. Well, how would they do that?
Just like they would sort of refer to like the organization, like for example, that they can provide evidence. This is our organizational chart.
Right. Or maybe introduce an employment agreement from the previous worker who had the same role, and then show that they resigned, something like that.
Yeah, that sort of evidence will help show that it's a genuine position.
Well, this is something that we're always telling people here, and I guess it's the same anywhere in the world for actually any illegal industry, any industry that involves dealing with administration of governments, especially. And that is that you can't simply claim something; you have to prove it. You've got to come up with some kind of evidence. What is evidence? Well, okay, evidence can be a statement that someone makes, signed off, but really, what we're talking about is documents that can be independently verified. To demonstrate what you're claiming. It's the same every country, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I think our countries are very sort of bureaucratic in that sort of way. They want to see the evidence so they can make a decision based on that.
That's right. Yeah, no, I've often likened getting a visa to getting a loan from the bank. But there's one key difference, and that is that banks want to lend money as much as possible because that's how they make money. Only they are restricted by regulations, whereas visa officers come from the other side. They start from a position of not wanting to grant visas to everybody. and then you have to really show them why they should approve it. There's a lot of risk to approving a visa for someone for a position or something they're not eligible for.
Yeah, and that's sort of why sort of we do the work that we do, because we're sort of trained and skilled into looking at what regulations there are, what is the legalities behind applying for a visa, and what are the case officers are looking for to persuade them that your application meets the criteria. A lot of people think, oh, why should I use a migration agent? I can just do it myself. However, that it's like everything. Go back to your example about the bank. I used my own mortgage. I used a mortgage broker to get a loan because it's. I don't know about sort of the legalities behind getting a loan or and those sort of things. So you go to experts when you need help to get something done.
That's right, and sometimes it's a very simple case of as a lay applicant, you might disclose a particular piece of information that's not really relevant to your case at all. However, once you've disclosed it, it sets off a way of thinking in the mind of the decision maker, and it sets them to starting to inquire about something which might lead to tripping over, falling over, and a decline which stays in your file forever. And I've seen this, too many times.
Yeah, it's like goes back to that saying, sometimes less is more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often say that our job is like a translator, because we take a person's situation and we then translate it into the language that's required to get things across the line. It's not about hiding information. It's not about cheating or presenting it in a way that's fraudulent, as some people perceive. It's merely about taking it and translating it into a way that it can be understood properly.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, some people, they try to overshare information that's not relevant. And as you said, that if you sort of say things, it might trigger something, a path that the case officer might go down to that we don't want them to go down to.
That's right.
So,
or they fail to declare something.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, that's our job. Our job is to sort of get the facts and get the relevant information and translate it, or show it in a way that it's going to satisfy the case officer.
Yeah. So we sort of got off the initial topic there. I want to come back just quickly again to student visas, because this is something that I think a lot of people could get some value out of. We do get a lot of questions about how to go and study in Australia, and to a certain degree we can advise them on certain matters. We have in-house registered migration agents as well for Australia. We do prefer dealing with people like yourself who are over there, in the thick of it. So you might have some better knowledge than us. Now here in New Zealand, if you want to apply for a visa as an international student, you want to study here, let's say you choose a what we would call a level 7 diploma, which is something at around that sort of graduate level of a bachelor degree, maybe a 1-year diploma, and you're going to spend somewhere between, let's say, $12,000 and $25,000 New Zealand on that course. You need to show to Immigration New Zealand that you have either paid for or can pay for the course fees, and that you've been accepted into the program. Plus the normal standard visa requirements of health and character and all of that kind of stuff. And you also need to show that you have available funds sufficient to support yourself during the term of that program. So if it's a 1-year program, this equates to 15,000 New Zealand dollars. So you need to show that you have $15,000 available. Many people, get this money directly into their bank account from their parents, from their family, through their savings. Others use a loan. There's an FTS scheme, a funds transfer scheme from some countries where they will arrange a loan in their home country and the banks will transfer money to New Zealand, which is then drip fed. But the point is they have to start by first proving they have this money that's genuinely available to them. Is this the case in Australia?
Yes and no.
Yes, and
Well, yes, it depends. So in Australia, we do require you to show funds. Actually, our funds that you have to show around 21,000 Australian dollars.
21,000 Australian dollars. Okay.
It's actually gone up recently. It used to be like 20,500, but
Right.
last year it's gone
Okay.
up. So, and it's all depends as well that if you have dependents that are coming with you on your visa, depending if you have your wife or a husband, then that's an extra 7,000 on top of that 20,000, 21,000 that you have to show. And if you have children as well, then that's an extra couple of thousand on top of that you have to show that you are able to support you and your dependents while you're in Australia. So by policy that you have to show you have the financial capacity to get a student visa in Australia. However, also within policy, there are different level for the different countries. So it's called like the risk level, the country risk level.
Right.
So
it's divided by country.
Yeah, so certain countries will have a higher risk level than other countries. So, for example, that if you are from like England or US or countries in Europe like Germany, France, then you're going to be considered level 1 risk.
Low risk.
So yes, so it's low risk. So people who are from those countries usually don't need to provide financial evidence. They can be up, but this is the thing, it's all subjective. Like the case officer, if the case officer thinks that you are someone that cannot afford the course, then they can, in the process of the application, ask for that. However, under policy, that they will not ask for the financial evidence to grant in order to grant the visa for those level 1 countries.
I see. And so let's say, for example, a country like India, we have a lot of Indian clients. There are plenty of people in India looking for overseas study. What kind of level of funds would somebody from India be required to have?
So India is classified as a level 3 country, so it's seen as a more higher risk country. Yeah. So for applicants who are from high risk countries, then they should prepare those funds that I sort of mentioned before. Depending if they're a single applicant, 21,000. If they've got family members based on the family members that they have. Okay. It's a bit more stricter as well about how the funds can be shown. So, so usually that they don't like if people just like, if they just see like your bank statement and there's a big deposit there, because we have a condition where it's like called genuine access to the funds. Yep. So if they just see a deposit in the bank account that was done the week before or the day before, then they think that that this person is just using it just to get the student visa. Just borrow so they need to sort of show history. So they will sort of show their bank statements. Usually the minimum is 3 months, but up to 6 months of transactional history, so that they can see that this person isn't just like putting the money in the account just to get the visa. Okay, yeah, so that's in terms of the available funds. How about in terms of the fees for your course of study? So here in New Zealand, if I choose that level 7 1-year study and I pay $15,000 to the college, the education institute, that will be 1 year's fees. I will get a receipt for 1 year. And then using that receipt, the student can then apply for the 1-year visa. Immigration will not grant more than that 1-year visa because you've only paid the fees for 1 year. Is that the same in Australia? A little bit different in Australia. So that receipt system, we call it a COE, or confirmation of enrollment. So basically basically that if you're looking to go into, let's say what you were saying before, diploma course. Say the diploma course was like $10,000 or something like that for the year. So depending on the school, that they will ask for either like a small deposit, and this is all related to whether the applicant is in the country, onshore or offshore, whether that they are from a high risk or low risk country. It all depends. Also, sometimes it depends on the relationship of the agent that is recruiting the student. Sometimes the agent has a good relationship and can get a lower sort of upfront deposit. So if there's someone from a low risk country, sometimes that they can get their COE or their receipt from the school for as low as a $1,500 deposit.
Wow.
But if it's a high risk country, usually they ask for a minimum of 25 to 50% of the total year's tuition.
Right. Yeah, because we've actually seen some people in our office as well who have come from Australia to New Zealand, and looking at their history and the visa history in Australia, this one particular case that's in my mind was a Korean national, a young woman who went to Australia to study a Bachelor of Nursing degree. It's a 4-year degree. And she actually was initially granted a 4-year visa. So in her case, he is saying that because she's from a good country such as South Korea with a reasonably good ranking, that it's possible she wouldn't have had to pay all her fees up front, which I believe she didn't for 4 years. And then also she wouldn't have had to show all of those $21,000 in funds to get that 4-year visa.
Yeah, the likelihood is that she wouldn't have had to show the funds up front for the 21,000. However, that for like a university degree where you're studying for 4 years, it's I always sort of advise them to show that you do have funds, because you're going to get granted a long-term visa. But yeah, she probably could have got the visa without the showing any funds. And for that university degree, usually they ask for 50% of the first year's tuition. It's different if you go into like a vocational education sector where there's a lot more competition, and so they sort of have, that's how they sort of get students. They sort of offer sort of a lower deposit. But for university, usually the standard practice is going to be 50% of their first year's tuition to get the COE, and then they get granted for the length of their course. So it could be 4 years. Also, something I'll add on that is that you get 1 month extra. So you actually, if you do one 12-month course, you get 13-month visa.
Right.
So you get extra month on for every year that your visa is. So she got, if her course was for 4 years, then she would get 4 extra months on top of her visa.
Oh, I see. Okay. To allow some processing afterwards. Yeah, that sounds quite interesting. It is slightly different to here in New Zealand. And I think some people listening to this will be thinking that it's quite attractive because they don't necessarily have to have all their funds up front. But I guess the point really to make is that, and this is something I'm always saying to people, that the grant of a visa is an act of discretion by the decision maker, and we just don't know what they're going to come back and ask for.
Totally. Yeah. I deal with a lot of level 2 countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and actually depending on the level 2, usually they ask for funds, but also it depends on the school. So if you got a school that is that's well established, then they have their rankings as well. So if you got someone from level 2 going to a level 1 school, then they're not required to show their funds or show money, and that's the same with level 2. But then you've got less established schools, like new schools that are on the market, or that have had adverse sort of history towards them. system, so they get ranked lower. So if you got someone that, and this is sort of our way of sort of weeding out sort of high risk applicants. So if you got someone that's like level 2 trying to apply for a level 3 school, then they're going to have to show their funds to get the visa, because it triggers off with immigration. This might be someone that's just using the student visa program to extend their visa, or just to work in Australia.
Sure, yeah, to find a way to stay in the country. We see the same things here. Okay, so look, I have a lot of clients here in New Zealand personally who have found themselves at what they would call, at the wall. They've studied here, tried to find ways to find the right type of work to gain residence, and they're just at a point where they're ready to give up. They feel frustrated. All these things keep changing. The system changes. New governments come in. New policy. The rules get tighter, and a lot of people then start looking for other countries, for other options. Now, Australia does occasionally come up. More likely, we hear people talking about moving to Canada, which seems to have at the moment quite a liberal immigration policy by comparison to our countries. But let's just say we have people here in New Zealand who have found themselves running out of opportunities. What would you suggest is a good way for them to think about going to Australia? And considering that these might be people who aren't from visa waiver countries, they would need to apply for a visa to be able to enter to Australia. Do you think that someone who holds a New Zealand qualification has a foot in the door, or is there something, some kind of easy way for them to get into Australia and find a job or a visa?
Yeah, it just depends on the occupation, the industry, and so on. I think that because Australia and New Zealand education systems are very similarly aligned. Yeah, so, and we use ANSCO, that someone that does have a New Zealand occupation could find advantages of trying to find employment in Australia. So the good thing is that a lot of the industry bodies for the skills assessment, recognise New Zealand occupations as the same level as Australian qualifications. So that is something that, if you're from New Zealand and you study in New Zealand and have a New Zealand qualification, that if you came to Australia and you could get that sort of assessed as equivalent to Australian qualification. It's a bit of a tough one, because if you have a sponsor in Australia, then it's that's like one foot in the door, that you could get sponsored and get a work visa in Australia. However, that a lot of people don't have the feet on the ground in Australia, sure. And they find it difficult to sort of get that temporary visa to enter Australia. But some people just come to Australia on the visitor visa, see how it is, see whether there are any opportunities. Then once they're in Australia, if they find an opportunity, then they make an application for a work visa, or look at sort of applying for skilled migration and those sort of things. Yeah, another thing is student visa. Applying for another student visa in Australia gives you time to sort of assess your options.
Sure. I imagine that a lot of people in that position, even if they could find a way to gain that first entry, the visitor visa into Australia, that because of COVID-19 and this, the effect on the economy, they may find it just difficult to get that job.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think COVID-19 has affected a lot of economies around the world, even though once this virus is gone, that it's businesses will open up again. It's not as simple as just employing a new person. Even the businesses themselves have to justify why they're going to bring on a new staff, and it's going to be hard if for 3 to 4 months you haven't been operating and you haven't got sales behind you to sort of show to justify that decision.
That's right. Yeah, I'm also wondering, and I guess it's the same for Australia. I'm also wondering whether, on top of the fact that there are a lot of our local citizens who will have lost their job and who are now skilling down, going into hospitality or retail and taking up a lot of jobs that could have been taken by migrants, as well as that, we may experience an insurge of overseas Australians and New Zealanders who have decided to come back to New Zealand because they've lost their job overseas. So, you know, if you look at just the UK as an example, how many thousands, tens of thousands of Australians and New Zealanders are now working in the city of London or around the UK or around, you know, America and Asia, who may have lost their job because of COVID-19, and now they're starting to rethink their life. They're going, okay, I might just move back in with mum and dad for a while, and I'll see if I can get a job at the local restaurant to tide me over. So you might be expecting the same kind of period of 3 to 6 months of a lot of difficulty for migrants. Would you say so?
Yeah, no, it's pretty tough for migrants in Australia at the moment, because I'm not sure about New Zealand, but Australia, we currently have a conservative government so their sort of policies are more towards helping Australian citizens rather than sort of helping temporary visa holders. So basically, that our Prime Minister just said to temporary, because there was a push for people that have lost their job, like who are on temporary work visas or who are international students, to get some access to welfare while they're unemployed. Because if they don't work, then they can't stay in Australia or pay their, they can't live. And but unfortunately, the government, the Prime Minister's just said that if you can't afford to stay in Australia, then it's better to go back home, which is like not a very sort of humanitarian sort of way outlook of things. But I think
turn off the tap when you don't want them, turn it back on when you want them to come back in.
That's the thing, yeah. Actually, our economy, our fourth biggest industry or export is international education, and for the government to go out and say that, oh, we don't need you when we're in a crisis, but you can come back when everything is okay.
Interesting.
All like fine and dandy. It's like kind of a slap in the face to all those people who've taken the leap of faith to come to Australia and to study a course, and then they've been told that we'll see you later because we can't support you.
Yeah, that's right. We see the same thing here, and I'm often going to bat for my clients who find themselves in this position. Right now, we have a lot of migrants banding together, forming groups online, Facebook groups, WhatsApp, coming together with petitions and rallies. Interestingly enough, you mentioned that it's your Conservative government that's having this view. We have what would be called a centre-left government at the moment, but they have the same view of narrowing immigration policy, New Zealanders first, whereas our traditionally conservative right-wing government, previously under John Key, had a much more broad and open, policy of inviting migrants, mainly because obviously that means more money. Isn't it? It's kind of interesting how the political spectrum is really just two sides of the same coin. Yeah.
Something interesting in Australia compared to New Zealand, in Australia that we have like states and territories. So even though we have policy coming from federal government, which is like migration or immigration is underneath the federal policy, we do have different policies coming from the different states and territories. So something that happened yesterday, that the Tasmanian government itself, they announced some policy to help international students. So they said that we'll give a grant out to those international students who are who are under financial hardship. So I mean, that's some sort of leeway room in Australia that sort of the individual states and territories can sort of help their sort of residents or their international residents. So if the federal government doesn't want to kick in, but it's sort of there's only so much that they can do. They can't sort of state can't sort of extend their visa or sort of that's left to immigration in Australia. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So let's all move to Tasmania. And it's a beautiful
place.
That's right. Anyone who's ever been there, it's a beautiful place. It's the birthplace of my mother. So, I've also heard the same thing, that it's a great place to live. A little bit quiet, maybe.
I think there's a lot of similarities to like parts of New Zealand, Tasmania.
Right.
Very,
well, and talking about states, many people don't know, many of our audience wouldn't know this, but New Zealand actually used to be a colony of New South Wales, which is a state of Australia. So the capital was Sydney, and New Zealand was governed by Sydney. So this is actually an unknown fact, part of New Zealand history. We have such a joint history, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to have this talk today, because we have Anzac weekend this weekend. Anzac, of course, is a strong part of our joint history as well. New Zealand and Australia, brothers in arms.
Yes, let's forget. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So look, I mean, we shouldn't take up too much time today, but I did want to talk about a couple more things. One is failing becoming a student or getting a job and trying to get residency through that sort of pathway of work. What's the Australian business or investment policy like? Here in New Zealand, we start at 10 million. You've got $10 million, the door is open, we make it very easy for you to move in, get your residence, stay here, you invest your money for a period of time. The next tier after that is $3 million, New Zealand dollars, and the requirements are a little bit more stringent. And then after that, we have what's called the entrepreneur category, which invites people to invest in business here and operate business. And you have to have a business which has some kind of innovation or high growth or export potential. There are rules, but generally speaking, you get a work visa, you can run your business for a period of time, and then you can convert that to residency if you meet the requirements. And the minimum capital capital investment for that is $100,000. It's not too high. How about in Australia? What sort of pathways are there for business owners?
We have similar sort of pathways to New Zealand. I've heard that it's a bit more easier in regards to some of those like investment visas in regards to what people can invest in.
Easier in New Zealand or easier in Australia?
In New Zealand, I hear that like a part of the portfolio that people can invest in is like property. Is that correct?
Yeah, it depends. Like you can't simply just buy a house. The point is it's supposed to be innovative or high growth, and a lot of people have brought their money in and then invested in a property development. So
yeah.
perhaps they purchase a lifestyle block, knock down the farmhouse, and then build 6 units or townhouses. So this can classify, depending on the circumstances, it can classify as a high growth investment.
Yeah. So in Australia, it's a bit more rigid in regards to what type of investment or what type of visas, business visas that they're available. Like New Zealand, that we do have a like significant investor visa for $10 million. Then it goes down to 5, and then at a lower category it's 3. And depending on what the money is, that there's sort of stipulations about what it can be invested in. So, for example, a certain percentage needs to be invested in like sort of like angel funding or funding of like other like investments and things like that. And they can't sort of have a certain percentage, and like they can't sort of just buy like property and use that as part of their investment portfolio. So there's a lot of regulations in regards to where that money is spent or invested in. So it's not as just easy, I've got $10 million or I got $5 million and I'm just going to invest in Australia to get my business visa. They have to actually, usually this is where a lot of like financial like funds sort of work with these like migration agents or people that have these clients to sort of help them sort of diversify their portfolio to meet the requirements of the visa. We do have a similar category to you guys in regards to the innovation visa. So that innovation visa, it's actually a bit higher. It needs to be at least 750,000, and it all depends on the state. So that's not run federally; it's run by the state. So you're when you are going to invest in a business or start up a business, you need to apply to a particular state that you want to invest in, and so that state will have its own sort of industries or what industries they want you to start up or work in or do a business in. And also that you can't just have like $10 million or all this money and just apply for a business visa. You need to have what they call like a significant business history. So like a history, experience like managing business or experience of owning your own business to meet the criteria of the business visa.
Sure. Well, that's the same here. Yeah, you still need to show that you are a business person and that you have that experience. But it sounds like sort of along the similar lines, but just slightly different requirements, a little bit of a higher income or investment requirement, but it's still available.
Yeah, it's still available. Something that, like, I mean, a lot of people look at Australia for the business, visa stream, and when they look at it, they think that it's unless they've got the 750,000 to start off with, they think it's a bit too hard because it's but something with that as well that if in Australia that you don't need to have wholly own your own business. That minimum, you can have shares in the business. So depending on whether if it's a publicly listed company, then you can only have 10%. As low as 10% ownership of that company. If it's just a general company, it's then 30% is sufficient enough to allow you to apply for the business visa.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it sounds quite similar to here. Just as I said, a little bit of a slightly higher threshold. We have the case though that here people see that minimum business investment of 100,000 and they think therefore that's all they need. Whereas in reality, if you're not sitting on between 300,000 to $500,000, you'll probably have difficulty because it's still a points-based system. You know, you have to show that you're employing local New Zealanders and you've got an English language level and this kind of thing.
Yeah, no, we use a points-based system as well, so that you get points for your work, your business experience, whether how much funds that you have, like your English language ability, sometimes you get like if it's a sort of a product or something like that, whether that has a patent or not, you get sort of points for that. Your qualifications, like if you have a master's degree or university degree, that's going to give you extra points. So yeah, it's a points-based system here as well. So it's not as simply having the funds there and just investing. You need to sort of meet the criteria. But something I want to add is that for those people who are looking to invest that don't have that business criteria and can't meet the business visa criteria, that there are visas in different states that are looking for small, they're called small business owner visas. So that if you invest depending on the state and their policy, if you invest like $100,000 in starting up a business in an area that they're looking to sort of grow, then they can give you a temporary visa, which can lead to permanent residency after a certain amount of time. So some of the states are like Queensland offers a scheme like this. If you invest in regional Queensland, Tasmania offer a scheme like this, and also South Australia offer a scheme like this. So if that's something that you're looking at, you've got a bit of money and you are looking at investing into Australia through a business visa opportunity, that could be an alternative to a business visa.
Yeah, no, I have to say that just talking about all these different types, and one of the key things that's coming out of this is that even though New Zealand and Australia have quite similar types of policies and similar approaches to the policies, Australia is just a lot more complicated, and the answers are not so simple. And I guess this is why anecdotally, we do hear a lot that people who have lived in Australia as migrants, when they give us a phone call here and we answer the phone, they say, "Oh my God, thank you for answering the phone. In Australia, you can't even get the migration agent on the phone. They're so busy." And it must be the case that it's so difficult to navigate the system that everybody needs, professional help from someone like yourself.
Yeah, like, I mean, this is the thing that there's, the saying, there's many ways to skin a cat. I hope you don't have a
We
pet
don't
cat.
skin cats.
So there's many ways to skin a cat. So basically that not one individual sort of you can put in a box. You depending on their sort of background and their visa history, then you can sort of look at different alternative visa options. So that's why I always encourage my clients that even though I can answer your phone call and email about your visa inquiry, it's best to sort of have a consultation together, because in a consultation that you can sort of ask questions and sort of weed out sort of what the client's objective is and what is like the best possible visa or alternative options for that client in particular, by sort of answering like general questions on an email or over the phone that you might not know that person might have a relative in Australia that they could be eligible for this visa. And that's the sort of information that you get from having consultation together.
That's right. Yeah. No, look, we experience the same thing here. You get a phone call or a quick message that says, "Hello, sir. I have work visa. I'm working in restaurant. Can I get residence?" And it's just not possible to answer that. But speaking of consultations, how does it work, generally speaking, in Australia, and specifically with you and your business? Do people have to pay for an initial consultation?
It depends. What I do with my business, that I offer people the opportunity to have a quick 15-minute consultation with me for free.
Okay.
Some other agents, they offer like the first consultation for free, but it all depends on where the migration agent is, the sort of the competition around, the sort of the market that they're approaching, whether they charge a fee or not. On average, that migration agent will charge between $200 to $300 for that for a consultation.
$200 to $300 for a consultation. Okay.
Yes.
And out of that, the migrant could expect that they would have a full and complete picture of their current situation, their chances for achieving the goals, residency or otherwise, and a plan for how to move forward.
Yeah, that's correct. So usually that $200 to $300 consultation, that's an hour-long consultation. Most migration agents will not want to do a full paid consultation for less than an hour, because that hour gives them enough time to get enough information about the client and make a judgment based on their knowledge and expertise about what is the best visa options for that client situation. Sure. And then at the end of the consultation, the client will sort of have a better idea about where to go forward, what are some options that that client can have in regards to applying for visas. And for me, I don't give just one option. I say that, okay, this is what you could do. If you sort of changed your situation to this, you could be eligible for that and that. So I give them options, because at the end of the day, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So we can give them all the visa options in the world, but if it's the individual doesn't want to sort of make the sacrifice or do some things to be applicable for that visa pathway, then there's not much that we can do for them.
Sure. No, that sounds good. And so anybody who's watching this who wants to have a consultation with Ed or talk to him, we're going to put the link in this video down below for his contact details, for his website, email, and you can also get in touch with us directly as well. We work together with Ed occasionally on some visas. And look, have a look at Australia. Maybe Australia is a good option for us all. I've lived there. Australia's a great country. They call it the lucky country.
Well, New Zealand's a great country as well. So, I mean, if anyone that's sort of thinking, who's watching this video, who's from overseas and is thinking about coming to New Zealand or Australia, feel free to sort of contact David or I, and we can sort of help you out. Okay.
All right, so let's wrap it up there. Thanks very much for coming on today, Ed. Maybe we can do another one of these in the future. We get some more into detail of some of the topics, but it's been good to discuss the general issues, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. No